Envision spending your entire life believing you understand everything about those who are nearest to you, only to discover that they have been concealing a disturbing secret for 25 years. Family secrets have the potential to influence our lives in ways we may not even be aware of. And occasionally, they prevent us from attaining genuine happiness. When the truth is eventually revealed, it can seem as though your entire world is crumbling in a single moment. Today we will delve into a chilling tale of love, betrayal, and a complex mystery surrounding unsolved crimes that rocked the serene town of Holland, Michigan to its very foundation. The events were so startling that every resident developed their own theories about what might have transpired. It took investigators several years before they were able to finally bring the suspect to trial. But was the correct individual held responsible? Gail Wingarden was born on April 24, 1965 to Wendell and Dorothy Wingarden. As the eighth child in a large and tightly knit family, she was raised in Ottawa County, Michigan. While the family was not affluent, they were well known for their deep connections and the care they extended to one another. They truly personified the essence of a loving and united family. Despite the warmth of their home, financial struggles were a frequent reality. From an early age, Gail harbored dreams of a career that would enable her to afford the things that every child desires. She saved up her money and confided in her older sister, Cheryl, that she intended to work hard so she would always have enough to buy anything she desired. As a teenager, Gail secured her first job as a waitress. Although the pay was modest, she earned a decent amount through tips and worked relentlessly. Her charismatic, approachable, and warm personality ensured that no one in her circle was ever indifferent to her. At 18, Gail experienced her first true love. The relationship progressed quickly. The young couple moved in together, envisioning a future where they would have their own home and begin a family. They lived together for roughly a year. In 1984, when Gail was 19, she started a new job where she met a 25-year-old contractor named Rick Brink. It was love at first sight. Gail ended her previous relationship and fully committed herself to her new romance. Rick was so taken with her that, on the very first day they met, he told his mother that he had found the woman he wanted to marry. He was completely smitten, and their relationship flourished with delightful dates and romantic outings. Rick made a concerted effort to make Gail happy, fulfilling her every desire. And the two of them were deeply in love, feeling completely fulfilled in each other's company. They were genuinely a perfect match, both hardworking, ambitious, and full of vitality. They shared the same aspirations for the future, determined to work hard, and eventually raise a family in the home they hoped to purchase. One summer, they visited Rick's family lake house on Lake Michigan, where he had a boat. Gail tried water skiing, and everyone who knew them said they appeared to be the perfect couple. On April 25, 1986, just one day before Gail's birthday, they got married in a small church ceremony, surrounded by family and friends. They had a long and happy life ahead of them. Rick's father, Rick Brink, assisted them in finding the ideal home they had always dreamed of. It was an old house situated on approximately 20 acres of land on the outskirts of their hometown, Holland, Michigan. On Ransom Street. Garrett secured a fantastic deal, and the newlyweds were eager to begin renovating so they could settle into their new home. Rick, being a skilled handyman who worked for a furniture company and trained carpenters, was well equipped to take on the task of renovating their house. By October 1987, they had moved into their partially renovated home, documenting their progress on video. The once old house was being brought back to life as they cleaned, painted, tore down walls, and repaired the floors. By the time they moved in, they had been married for about 18 months. Gail confided in her sister that the next room to be renovated would be a nursery, as they were ready to take the next step in their life and fill their home with children. On November 21, 1987, Rick and Gail attended the wedding of one of Rick's high school friends and had a wonderful time. But the following day, neither of them showed up for work. At the time, Rick was employed by a major furniture company called Trenway. Rick was known for being hardworking and dependable, so it was completely out of character for him to miss work without informing anyone. His supervisor tried calling his home, but there was no answer. Growing concerned, he then contacted Rick's parents to see if they knew why he hadn't shown up to work. The supervisor was genuinely worried about his employees' well-being. Rick's parents were equally alarmed. They knew their son well and understood that disappearing without a word was not something he would ever do. They decided to contact Gail's workplace to check on her, only to discover that she too had not shown up that morning. Anxious and concerned, Rick's parents hurried to their son and daughter-in-law's home to find out what was happening. When they arrived at Rick and Gail's house, they immediately noticed Rick's car parked in the driveway. Feeling a sense of relief, they hoped the couple was simply home, perhaps just unwell or sleeping in. But as they approached the vehicle, they saw Rick inside in an unusual position. He was sitting in the driver's seat with his knees on the floor beneath the steering wheel, his body hunched over and leaning toward the passenger seat, his head resting against the passenger side door. Rick's father, Garrett, stepped closer and called out his son's name, but there was no response. When Garrett reached in and tapped Rick's shoulder, he found his son unresponsive with blood coming from Rick's head. Horrified, Rick's parents did not enter the house, fearing what else they might find. They immediately contacted the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. When the deputies arrived, they went inside the house. Upon inspection, they found Gail in the bedroom. At first glance, it appeared as though she was simply sleeping, with a pillow covering her face. But when the officers lifted the pillow, they discovered it was stained with blood. And Gail was no longer alive. She had been shot 3 times at close range. Within minutes, backup arrived, and investigators began examining the home, searching for any clues or evidence that could lead to the perpetrator. They meticulously combed through the scene, trying to piece together what had occurred. The initial theory from the officers was that this might have been a targeted attack on Gail, and that afterward Rick, in a state of distress, had harmed himself. However, when they thoroughly searched Rick's car, they found no weapon and no evidence to suggest that he was responsible for the attack on his wife before taking his own life. In an instant, the fairy tale romance that had begun at work and led to dreams of a happy family life came to a tragic and violent end, leaving behind no clear motive or suspect. The investigation continued. The weapon used in the crime was identified as a .22 caliber revolver. It was later confirmed that Rick had suffered a fatal injury from a gunshot to the head. He had been shot twice, both at close range. Investigators noticed a bullet hole in the passenger side window of Rick's car. The window was shattered, and the driver's side window was partially rolled down, leading authorities to believe that the perpetrator was someone the victims knew. Based on this, they theorized that Rick had rolled down the window to speak with the person, suggesting that he likely knew them and did not sense any immediate danger. Furthermore, after inspecting the house, it became clear that this was not a robbery. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. The door had not been broken into. Nothing was ransacked, and all belongings were neatly in place. Rick and Gail's wallets were found on the kitchen table with cash and credit cards still inside. Some jewelry was scattered throughout the house. The victims were both still wearing their wedding rings, and no weapon, shell casings, or other significant evidence was discovered in the house. The bullets recovered were still lodged inside the victims, suggesting that the suspect had come with a single intention to take their lives. As for usable physical evidence, it was either non-existent or insufficient for analysis. 6 fingerprints were found in the house for belonging to the victims, while the other 2 could not be matched with any records in law enforcement databases. The forensic examination concluded that Rick and Gail were killed in the early hours of November 22. Rumors and speculation began to swirl around the case, but not everyone who had suspicions was willing to speak openly or inform the authorities. With limited evidence, investigators were unable to make any arrests or identify any potential suspects. However, it was established that the last sighting of Rick and Gail was around 11:00 p.m. on November 21, when they were leaving their friend's wedding reception. According to the autopsy, their deaths occurred sometime between then and the following day, nearly a full day before they were found. Hoping to gather more information about the couple's last known contacts, investigators continued questioning friends, family, co-workers, and anyone else who knew Rick and Gail. The first person they spoke with was Gail's brother, Ryan Wending-Garden. He mentioned Gail's ex-boyfriend, who had once confronted her in a public place, claiming he still loved her and felt jealous. He had tried to persuade her to come back to him, but Gail was already married and happy. The police tracked down Gail's ex-boyfriend and brought him in for questioning. He denied any involvement and even agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed. He also had a solid alibi, so the authorities ruled him out as a potential suspect. About 3 or 4 days into the investigation, the police received another lead. The previous owner of Rick and Gail's house came forward to the police station, suggesting that the perpetrator might have been looking for him and wasn't aware that he no longer lived there. The former owner was a biker who went by the name Shotgun and had been affiliated with a motorcycle club. In the past, he had been involved in the trafficking of banned substances and weapons. However, Shotgun eventually became an informant, as he didn't agree with selling illegal substances to teenagers. He worked with federal agents, primarily providing information about vigils involved in this kind of illegal activity. The detectives dug deeper into this lead, interviewing other informants and questioning members of various motorcycle clubs in Detroit. Despite their efforts, they couldn't find any evidence linking these groups to criminal activity or to the double crime involving Gail and Rick. After about a month, this theory was also dismissed. A new lead emerged on Christmas Eve when another crime occurred near the Brinks' home. Deborah Wilson was found in her own backyard, the victim of a fatal assault. She had been attacked and sustained a severe injury to her neck. During the investigation, it was discovered that Gail and Deborah had gone to the same high school and were in the same class. They were the same age and had overlapping social circles, which immediately raised speculation that the crimes could be connected. The small town's residents were terrified. The community was on high alert as fear spread that a potential suspect was still out there. The senseless nature of the crimes made people worry for their own safety, wondering if there would be more victims. However, as time went on, investigators were unable to find any connection between the two incidents. The case of the double crime, involving the young married couple, was eventually shelved. All the files and evidence were placed in storage, where they remained for the next 2 decades. Friends and family, slowly, began to lose hope that justice would ever be served. The families learned to live with the possibility that they might never know the truth about what happened to their loved ones. But after 20 long years of waiting, the truth finally came to light, revealing not only an unexpected suspect, but also dark family secrets. Following the deaths of Rick and Gail Brink, no arrests were made. In 2009, the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office formed a cold case team to investigate unsolved crimes. By 2011, detectives Venus Ripper and David Blakely reopened the 24-year-old case of the Brink couple. They began reviewing old documents and conducted over 200 interviews. To make progress on these cold cases, the detectives worked together for about 7 to 8 years, developing their own strategy. Their approach relied on the passage of time as an advantage. They operated with a fresh perspective, hoping to catch details that may have been overlooked during the original investigation. Detective Ripper explained, "Loyalties change, friendships change, and people who might have kept a secret back then may no longer feel the need to do so. Or they may have held on to it for so long that they just want to let it go." After closing the case involving Deborah Wilson, where the suspect had already passed away, the detectives turned their focus back to Rick and Gail's case. Nearly a year passed before they began interviewing some family members. When they spoke with Gail's sister, Cheryl Murphy, and one of her aunts, they encountered some puzzling information. Both women mentioned that Gail and Cheryl's brother, Ryan Wingardin, had unsettled them over the years with odd remarks. According to the aunt, these comments began as early as the couple's funeral. She recalled Ryan saying to her, "Do you think I could have done it?" She was taken aback and speculated that Gail and Rick might still be alive if it hadn't been for a family argument that took place the night before the tragedy. On November 20th, Gail's aunt received a call from her first. Gail complained about her brother Ryan, telling her aunt that he owed her money and wasn't in any hurry to pay it back. Shortly after, Ryan called their aunt as well, venting his frustration about Gail. He was upset, claiming that Gail acted as if she were better than the rest of the family and refused to allow their parents to park their camper on her driveway. Gail's aunt knew that parking the family camper had been a long-standing issue among the Wingardians. Later, the aunt explained that the elder Wingardians had sold their house for some reason and were temporarily living in their camper on Ryan's driveway. However, this arrangement violated county codes, so they couldn't stay there for long. Ryan was trying to find a solution and had discussed the situation with Gail, but she wouldn't let their parents park near her home. This made Ryan very angry. Both the aunt and Cheryl claimed they had heard Ryan say, "Sometimes I wonder if I did it," because of that argument, clearly referring to the crime. After speaking with Cheryl and the aunt, the detectives were intrigued, but also puzzled. They revisited the case files and found that Ryan and his girlfriend, Pam, had been questioned at the time of the crime. They claimed they had spent the evening doing laundry, first at a laundromat, and then at a friend's house. However, the detectives noticed that this friend had never been contacted to verify their alibi. It was later discovered that a few years after the crime, Ryan and Pam had gotten married and were still together when the investigation was reopened. In October 2012, they were both called in for questioning again, which only added to the mystery. During the first interrogation, Pam admitted that the alibi they provided back in 1987 was false. They had not actually been at the friend's house. Despite this, she insisted she was certain of Ryan's innocence. She was brought in for another interview on January 15, 2013. This time, a personnel specialist was present, because Ryan had insisted that Pam not speak to the police without an attorney. Detectives suspected Pam was hiding something, so they went to her workplace 3 days later to ask more questions. This time, Pam declined the presence of a personnel specialist. She began to open up, and the detectives decided to continue the interview at the police station. It was there that Pam finally confessed. Many years ago, Ryan had told her he was responsible for the deaths of his sister and her husband. A few months later, Pam revealed even more details. She admitted that the day after the crime, but before the bodies were discovered, Ryan took her to the Brinks' home. Pam actually saw their bodies covered in blood. She had kept silent for 25 years because she loved him, but also out of fear, as Ryan had repeatedly threatened her, warning that she would face the same fate if she ever spoke up. Pam Wingard also told investigators that before the bodies were found, Ryan confessed that he had committed the crime because he was jealous of Rick Brink's happiness and success. He was also worried that Gail might reveal a dark family secret, that he and Gail had been involved in a relationship. Based on Pam's testimony, Ryan Wingard was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, facing trial for the deaths of his sister and her husband. While under oath, he described 3 instances of close contact with his sister Gail when they were teenagers. Regarding the last encounter, he claimed they only touched each other and nothing more. During the trial, Ryan took the stand in his own defense. When the topic of his intimate interactions with Gail came up, he offered an explanation. According to him, they were both just curious about each other, and nothing more. He acknowledged that if they had had more time together, they might have explored further. But their mother soon entered the room, and nothing else happened. He then claimed that sometime later, they found some marijuana in their father's truck, and while under the influence, he began touching her. He stated that a similar incident occurred later, but insisted that it was the last time. He maintained that these incidents were consensual, and that he never did anything beyond touching. Ryan's trial began in March 2014, with Pam as the prosecution's key witness. Several other witnesses were also called, including Ryan's aunt and his sister Cheryl, both of whom recounted the strange comments Ryan had made over the years. Another witness was a friend of Ryan's named Jim Meacham. Jim claimed he often visited Ryan's home in the mornings for coffee, just to sit and chat. Jim testified that on the morning of November 23, he dropped by Ryan's house and Ryan casually mentioned that his sister and her husband had died. Jim didn't ask any questions, assuming it was some kind of routine matter. However, he also noted that Ryan had shared this information several hours before the bodies were officially discovered. The defense attempted to challenge Jim's memory, arguing that his conversation with Ryan might have taken place the day after the bodies were discovered rather than before. They couldn't state this with absolute certainty, but they felt confident that given the over 25-year gap since the incident, there was room for doubt. The defense also raised several other key points. They primarily argued that Ryan was innocent, and that the only evidence against him was Pam's testimony, which lacked any substantial physical evidence or supporting proof. On March 28, 2014, the jury found Ryan Weingarten guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Rick and Gail Brink. The deliberation took only 4 hours. After the verdict, his own sister, Cheryl Murphy, said, "We're done, we finally got him." Less than a month later, Judge John Holsing sentenced Ryan to 2 life terms, without the possibility of parole. He stated, "This was a cruel crime. You are a cruel, cold-blooded criminal." Ryan never admitted guilt to the authorities, and continued to insist on his innocence until the very end. Over the next year, both the prosecution and defense built their arguments around their theories. The defense maintained that it was more likely the crime was a case of mistaken identity, aimed at the home's previous owner, rather than Ryan killing his sister and her husband out of jealousy, or due to an alleged relationship he wanted to hide. They pointed out that Rick was not Gail's first serious boyfriend, or the first man she had lived with, and that Ryan had no issues with her previous partners. The defense argued that the theory of the couple being killed to cover up a relationship between siblings was weak. To discredit Pam's testimony, the defense questioned why she had waited so long, over 2 decades, before coming forward with her version of events. To recap, Pam and Ryan met just a few months before the crime. She told investigators and testified in court that right after the crime, Ryan came to her, confessed, and then took her to the crime scene the day before Rick's parents discovered the bodies. He showed her the bodies and threatened to harm her if she ever spoke about it. At that time, Pam was not yet his wife, and they had no children together. But she claimed she knew he had killed his sister. Despite this, she continued their relationship, eventually marrying him and having children. I'm in shock, folks. While the defense was correct in pointing out that the motive seemed weak, and that there was no forensic evidence, the prosecution countered with several points, even if they weren't direct evidence. First, they highlighted that each victim had been shot in the head and face, which is often indicative of a personal reason behind the crime. Ryan Weingarten was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. In August 2015, Ryan's appeal was reviewed by the court. The defense sought to overturn the conviction or have a new trial. Their main argument was that the only evidence against Ryan was Pam's testimony, and they believed the jury should have seen her police interviews to demonstrate how investigators had allegedly manipulated her. The court, however, disagreed and upheld the conviction. One of the challenges of the case was the time that had passed since the crime, which remained unsolved for too long. There was no weapon recovered, no forensic evidence, and the motive presented by the prosecution seemed speculative. Although motive isn't a legal requirement for a conviction, juries often rely on it when making their decisions. It might have been more convincing to present a plausible motive, like a dispute between Ryan and Gail over their parents or the camper situation. On the other hand, Ryan had no criminal history prior to this crime. Of course, we know that a clean record doesn't necessarily mean innocence. Some people just don't get caught. Furthermore, the only substantial evidence against him was the testimony of others, primarily his wife. The statements from his aunt and sister about Ryan's strange comments over the years might seem suspicious, but they don't constitute hard proof. Could investigators have really manipulated Pam as the defense claimed? While she was able to provide crucial information during her interrogations, It's also possible she was a woman considering divorce and found a way to distance herself from Ryan permanently. This isn't a proven fact, but it does raise questions. It seems risky to sentence someone to life in prison based solely on the words of a person who claims to have feared her husband for 25 years, despite never showing signs of that fear to others. Why didn't Pam go to the police when she wasn't yet married to him and could have ended the relationship more easily? And if she confided in someone else, why didn't anyone else come forward? One of the detectives noted that over time, people's loyalties can shift. Those who once kept dark secrets may years later reconsider their decisions. Perhaps they want to ease their conscience or no longer feel the same attachment to the person they once protected. In my view, this case is too tangled to draw a clear conclusion. Relying solely on Pam's testimony without sufficient evidence raises doubts about the fairness of the conviction. Did the jury make the right decision, or was the prosecution's case built on improving allegations? What do you think? Was justice served? Or is there a possibility of error here? This case highlights the complexities of justice, especially when time, emotions, and conflicting stories play such a pivotal role. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Hidden Cases files. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.